So it's turned over to me for tonight and Sunday. We're doing apologetics in a nutshell, part 1 tonight, part 2 on Sunday. Apologetics, if you don't know, apologetics is the study of the defense of the Christian faith from an evidentiary, from an intellectual standpoint. The word apologetics has its root in the Greek word apologia, which means to speak in defense of. It's also where the word apology comes from, although we don't apologize for the Christian faith, but we should speak in defense of the Christian faith. How do I know that we should be doing this? 1 Peter 3:15, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. We are commanded in Scripture to defend our faith, to be ready to defend our faith. And it's more than just Jesus said. For us, Jesus said is enough, but for many people that we're talking to, they don't even believe in believe in Jesus. Now, the gentleness is hard for me and Stephen sometimes when we're talking to someone and they don't get it, or they're fighting us on what we know has been revealed to us as the truth. Here it is, black and white. If I had written it, it might say do it with a hammer, but that's not how it works. Scripture says do it with gentleness and respect. So we're going to work on that. The more you know, the more you train on this, the easier it is to be gentle and respectful. Why? Because you're confident, more and more confident in the words of Christ, in the words of Scripture, and the truth that we have on our side. The purpose of apologetics: to defend the faith as prescribed and commanded in Scripture, witnessing to non-believers, especially intellectual types who need the evidence to be convicted. We're nothing special as Christians when we're witnessing to someone, other than we are the conduits that God has chosen in that particular instance. When you're talking to someone and you're giving them the evidence of the faith and you're defending the faith, God has chosen you as the vessel for that moment to bring the gospel to that person. So we take it seriously. And the third reason, a purpose of apologetics, is discipling believers like we're doing here, preparing us to go out and speak the truth and defend the faith. So, in a nutshell, we're talking about the big topics of apologetics, and we're going to get into one specific today. But basically, apologetics seeks to show that we're created, not evolved. That we have a creator, that we're not a product of evolution or the Big Bang. So, in a nutshell, let's start with the nutshell itself. Say a pecan. Now, a pecan is a nutshell, and it grows on the tree, and it falls to the ground, and it can be eaten by a squirrel, eaten by us. But if God ordains the conditions perfectly, and the soil is right, and the moisture is right, and the climate is right, and the sun is right, and the temperature is right, then that little nut has life inside of it, and it will fall to the ground and germinate and turn into a sapling, and then eventually it will turn into its own tree, its own pecan tree. This is an example of the fine-tuning of the universe. This is an apologetics term. We point to the fine-tuning of the universe to show that we're not evolved, that it couldn't have happened over time. The fine-tuning of the universe is things like this pecan that is germinating is far enough from the sun that it doesn't get scorched and burn up and it's close enough to the sun that it doesn't freeze. And it's got just enough rain that it germinates, but it doesn't die from overwatering. And it's just dry enough that it doesn't dry out, right? But it does have enough water. And the soil has the right nutrients, and the temperature is the right temperature for photosynthesis. None of this can happen without everything being right. We're involving not just a little pecan, but we're involving the sun and the sky and the climate and the dirt. And so all of it is involved in the growing of this next pecan tree. It all has to be tuned together, and it cannot have happened little by little. It is a complete system that is complete in its totality, from the entire earth and the system, solar system, down to a single nutshell. And it all works together, and it had to all happen at once. And as you know, most of the pecans don't germinate and become trees. Most of the pecans feed animals, which in turn feed other animals. And you understand the cycle of life. All of it works together. God knows what that pecan that falls, he knows whether it's going to feed a squirrel or be in a pecan pie or be a tree. He knows. And all of it works together. And it also brings up the notion of a family tree. Has anybody in here know or met, before they passed away, your great-grandparents? Did you know your great-grandparents? Raise your hand. Okay. Did anybody, this is a rarity now in today's culture, based on longer generation intervals, but did anybody know their great-great-grandparents? Anybody ever? So back, a century ago, when women started having children at a younger age and they had bigger families, and you had smaller generation intervals, some people knew their great-great-grandparents. That's happened. You've heard that. But what for sure can we say that if you knew your great-great-grandparents, that you would have in common with them? One thing that you can for sure say that you would have in common with your great-great-grandparents is that you're both human. And they would have that in common with their great-great-grandparents, and so on. And there was never a time in your family tree, in your lineage, when something besides a human got together with something besides another human and made a human. That's what evolutionists want you to believe. They want you to believe that if you go back far enough, your great times ever how many were chimpanzees. And somehow at the last moment of chimpanzeehood in your family, they produced the first human in your family. And you've all seen the chart that shows how we walked upright and stuff like that. Well, there's something that the chart doesn't normally show. It doesn't show, if you keep going backwards, at some point, the chimpanzee had to come from somewhere. Maybe a squirrel, okay? So you've got squirrels as your great ancestors, if you're an evolutionist. But then it doesn't stop there. Because the squirrel, for an evolutionist, they can't say this isn't true, came from Grandpa Broccoli. And then before broccoli was the lowly asparagus. But it gets worse than that. Before that, if you go far enough back, you get to great-grandpa what? Nothing. Great-grandpa Nothing is at the very end of the evolutionist family tree. It's easy to believe in creation, just from a logical standpoint. We have the Big Bang. They have the Big Bang. We have the Big Man. They have the Big Bang. And the Big Bang is where they say there was an explosion, and everything came to be. Now, it had to evolve over millions. Currently, according to Google, 3.42 billion years since the Big Bang, and it had to all come to pass. But something, even if you're an evolutionist, something had to explode, right? They don't want to go there. They say, in the beginning was nothing. Let me ask you this. If there were ever a time in history where absolutely nothing existed, what then would we have today? Nothing. But we have something. We have everything, right? We have creation, a fine-tuned. It's not perfect for us because we live in a fallen world, but the fine-tuning of the universe is obviously a creation. It works together, and so we have something, and we didn't come from nothing. Okay, that's the basics of creationism. We can go into that further in depth, but for today, I want to talk about something that is the first step in talking to a non-believer, an atheist, an evolutionist. Before we on Sunday, we're going to go into the Bible. We're going to go into the truth of Christ as the Messiah, all of the things that make the Christian faith. But first, we have to get to the point of there is a creator. So if this doesn't work, then we have to talk to them, to their intellect. Now, the problem with us as Christians going out from here to witness to people is, number one, eventually, and it won't take long for me, you're going to run into someone who's smarter than you, a non-believer who's smarter than you. And guaranteed, you're going to run into a lot of them that think they're smarter than you. So you have to be able to talk philosophically about things that can reason with them. So what we start with in apologetics is the existence of truth. Objective morality, objective truth versus subjective reality, or what we call moral relativism. It's all relative. Now, we know as Christians what truth is and where truth comes from, because we've been taught and we've learned it and we believe it based on our own observations and the witness in our lives. Where does truth come from? What is truth? John 4:16, Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. We can spend generations preaching on that one verse. I want to point out that he is the truth. That Jesus Christ is the truth. He's the source of everything that's true. He's the source of our moral absolutes, the things that are transcendent in our lives, no matter what we think as humans. What is really true is all from Jesus. Let me keep going. So subjective morality, also known as relativism, meaning it's all relative. This is based on or influenced by personal feelings, tastes, or opinions. In the late 1930s, Hitler got some people stirred up. And he got a nation, for the most part, and a culture convinced that Jews were subhuman and they needed to go. And people believed that. They believed it as true. An entire country, for the most part, believed that as true. But was it true? Were Jews subhuman? Of course not. Because it doesn't matter what we think compared to the truth. We need to line our thoughts up with the truth, but we can be wrong. We are fallen. We're subject to the curse of sin. We're subject to human frailties. And even though we think it to be true, something to be true, that in itself, and even if we agree on it, that is not enough to make it true. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, objective morality, objective truth, is not influenced by personal feelings or opinions in considering and representing facts. Okay, we have moral absolutes. Let's talk about a moral absolute. No matter what a tribe comes up with somewhere, anywhere, is torturing a baby for fun always wrong? It's absolutely always wrong. And we know that to be wrong. But some tribes might say, okay, pedophilia, cannibalism, whatever, extermination of the Jews. They might come to a consensus in their tribe that that's right, but it's not right. There are moral absolutes transcending human consensus and transcending human agreement and human opinion. There are things that line up that are always true. Now, why does this matter to us? Because evolutionists, atheists that we're trying to convert, don't understand this. They say that truth is all subjective. It's all relative. Your truth, my truth. You hear that in our culture. You hear that phrase. Well, that's your truth. But my truth is that men and men can be married, and women can be married, and that's fine. It's a marriage. But you can have your truth, I'll have my truth. Well, there are moral absolutes. The Bible is full of moral absolutes. And Jesus is the truth. Does truth exist? Absolutely yes, and it is objectively true no matter what we think. So I'm going to offer you 6 proofs of the existence of truth, objective truth. Okay? Number 1, the concept of good behavior. Think about someone you know that you would say is a nice person. Got that person in your mind? A nice person. Now, just as easily, you can think about someone who is not a nice person. All right? Throughout history, mankind has generally agreed, we're not even talking about Christianity here. Mankind has agreed that the human idea of good behavior is obvious to everyone. It is self-evident that, for instance, our example, that torturing a child is objectively morally wrong. When we watch a movie, especially a war movie or a thriller or a Marvel movie, almost, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, very quickly in the plot, the good guys and the bad guys are established in a movie. Without a standard, an overarching standard that is already there is no good guys and bad guys. But we know, even atheists can go to a movie and see very quickly, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. In their worldview, there is no good and there is no bad based on evolution. Morality cannot have evolved. It has to come from somewhere. Truth has to come from somewhere. A moral law, don't torture babies. Any law has to have a moral law giver. A law has to have a lawmaker. We know who the lawmaker is. We've just heard from him. He says he's the truth. They say, well, if I admit to something being absolute, then I have to admit to the lawmaker. If there is an absolute truth, who is the truth giver? Well, there's not a truth giver because we're evolved from nothing. So I'm going to plant my flag on subjectivity, on you do you and I'll do me. We'll see how good that works out for him in the next few slides. The second proof of the existence of objective truth, mistreatment. An atheist might say that he does not believe in objective morality, absolute truth. But the moment that he is mistreated or perceives that he is mistreated, his actions will belie his words, and he will react as if a moral standard does indeed exist. When he denies, for instance, here's a story. There was a professor that was a Christian man at a secular public university. And even though he was there at a public university, he was sharing the gospel with his students. One of the students responded by saying, "You can't force your views on others because everything is relative. My views are my views, your views are your views." And what he was trying to do was talk about the existence of Christ as the absolute truth. But the student complained. He said, there is no absolute morality because everything is relative. So the professor walked over to where the student was sitting. He had a desk. He had his iPhone out, like we all do. And he walked over there and picked up the student's phone, put it in his pocket, and walked back to the front. The student asked him what he was doing, and he said he didn't have an iPhone, or at least not a new one, and he wanted that one, so he was going to take it. What did the student do? He said, "No, you can't do that. That's theft. It's wrong. It's not fair." So the student that was 2 seconds ago saying everything is relative, all of a sudden he was invoking the standard of truth. He was invoking morals. So anytime an atheist wants to say it's all relative, when the rubber meets the road and they're perceived to be mistreated, they want to dip their toe in our worldview, which is that there is a standard of truth. Immediately. They can't help it. They want to have the best of both worlds. Number 3, measuring value systems. Okay? Think about political parties in this instance. We have 2 basic political parties in this country. Okay? Now, we're not going to take a vote, but you just think about which party that you think is the better party. The party that you think is better is obviously they're not perfect. Okay? But the reason that you think they are the better party is because they come the closest to the standard. They're not perfect, but they come the closest to the standard. They get more things right than they get wrong. But without the existence of truth and without a truth giver, there is no standard. There's no standard to measure them up to. So even when avowed atheists, avowed communists, people that are absolutely against God, when you start talking politics with them, you can get them going because their system is better. And the question to ask them is, by what standard? Because it can't just be by their standard. They have to have a standard. If it's just by their standard, then they can't complain about my politics at all because I've got my standard. But that's not how it works. What they're really saying is, mine's better objectively, and they don't have a leg to stand on. Does that make sense? Okay, here's a good one. Number 4, attempting to improve morally. No one ever woke up, well, no sane person ever woke up, especially Christians, but no sane person, even atheist, wakes up and says, my morals and my goodness I hope they go downhill today. I want to be more immoral today. Now, maybe if you're out of your mind, a serial killer or some psycho, that doesn't apply. But no sane person wakes up trying to be a worse person than they were the day before. No, we want to improve as people. Put Christianity aside. Even people that you know that are non-believers want to do good things. They want to improve, right? They want to be better. But if there's no ultimate standard of right and wrong, you can't improve. You might change, but how would you know that you improved? You have to have a standard to measure it by. It's like this. If there is no hope of moral improvement, if there is hope of moral improvement for anyone, there must be an absolute standard of good that exists above and outside the process of improvement. In other words, there must be a target for humans to aim their moral efforts and also a ruler by which to measure their progress. Without an objective moral standard of behavior, there is no sense in talking of becoming better if better means simply what we're becoming. It is like this. It's like congratulating yourself on reaching a goal and then defining the goal as the place you have reached. Does that make sense? It's like congratulating yourself on reaching a destination, but the destination is wherever you are. There's no way to measure the goal. Improving morally, making yourself better is a Christian concept. It is not an atheist concept. Most every atheist, most every evolutionist wants to do it. They want to be better, but they just don't know why, or they won't admit why. Why is because it's written on our hearts to be better, because we want to get closer to the truth, the standard. Number 5, feeling a sense of what we should and shouldn't do. The words ought and ought not imply the existence of a moral law that mankind recognizes and feels obligated to follow. Virtually all humans would agree that we ought to save the life of a drowning child, and that we ought not to kill or maim for enjoyment or entertainment. It's perfectly intelligible to believe that humans are morally obligated to possess or try to acquire traits such as compassion, mercy, generosity, and courage. But anytime someone says you ought to do this or you ought not to do that, they are invoking the standard. They are invoking a moral absolute that is given to us by Christ. Again, in an evolutionary world, in a world without God, what someone ought to do and what someone ought not to do is entirely up to them, because there is no standard. Everyone knows there's a standard. These are things, I'm not trying to convince y'all. I'm getting a lot of head nods. That's because we believe, and we're believers, thank God. These are things you tell people when someone is against Christ or against Christianity or against even a creator. Someone says, you ought not to do that, and you say, by what standard? That's always what you ask. By what standard? Again, if it's your standard, that's fine. I've got my standard. But we know there is a standard. Finally, this is a good one. I love it in my class when I'm teaching the kids. If you see someone making excuses for doing wrong, I didn't get the note. My parents didn't tell me. I thought it was somewhere else. My dog ate my homework. If someone does not believe in an objective standard of behavior, then why should they be anxious about their performance? Why should they make excuses for how they behaved in a circumstance? Why don't they go on with life They don't have to defend themselves. Just merely someone defending themselves is saying, I know I didn't make the standard, but I'm going to make excuses for it. A man doesn't have to defend himself if there is no standard. C.S. Lewis maintains that the truth is that we believe as a culture, as a people, that we believe in decency so much that we feel the rule of law, the rule of Christ, the absolute moral law pressing on us, that we cannot bear, even atheists, even non-believers, can't bear to face the fact that we are breaking it. And we will shift responsibility or hide from it. You see people doing this every day, all the time. So making excuses for doing wrong is proof of the fact that everybody knows that truth exists. So, behavior, good behavior, mistreatment, measuring values, attempt to improve morally, a sense of what we should and shouldn't do, and making excuses for doing wrong. That's proofs of the existence of objective truth, God's standard. And if God's standard exists, then God exists, because someone has to give us the standard. The standard cannot have evolved. There's not a chance that happened. We have, as Christians, a monopoly on the truth. We have the truth on our side. Praise be to God. All glory to Him. We own the truth in the person of Christ. So, conclusion. Objective truth does exist. It's grounded and rooted in the person of Christ and laid out for us in Scripture. Bible-believing Christians have a monopoly on the truth. But here's the question that I want you to take home. Do we trust Jesus, who is the author of truth, who cannot lie, who sets the standard for everything in our lives? Do we trust Him in every situation? Or do we decide to go our own way? You know that feeling you get right before you make a bad decision? That feeling is telling you, don't make that bad decision. That feeling is your conscience. That feeling is the almighty truth giver, lawmaker, working on your heart, informing you of the right decision to make, informing you of laying guilt on your heart when you make the wrong decision. That cannot come from nowhere. That comes from Christ, the moral lawgiver, the ultimate authority. My hope is that, number one, we will be so thankful that none of this was earth-shattering to us, that we understand that there is absolute truth and it exists in the form of Christ and His Word. And number two, that we will use that knowledge to put our trust in Him in every situation. You can trust every one of His promises. You can trust everything He said to you. You can trust His plan for your life. If His plan for your life includes having a stroke and living 10 years in pain, and not being physically able to do everything you wanted to, will you be blessed by that? Absolutely. If His plan includes going through trials that you heretofore could not imagine going through, as Christians, will He bring you through that? Absolutely. He may not bring you through it this side of glory, but He will bring you through it. Absolutely, He will bring you through it. He's never backed down on a promise yet. It's impossible for Him to not keep His promises. So that's part one. You know a little bit about apologetics. You know how to defend the truth and defend our faith. Again, we have the truth on our side. Jesus says, I am the way and the truth. No one comes to the Father but through me. Why? Because Hinduism is not the truth. Mormonism is not the truth. Atheism is not the truth. Fill in the blank. If it's not Jesus, it's not the truth. Thank y'all for listening to this. Just a brief little preview of Sunday morning. Part 2, Apologetics in a nutshell. We're going to do these 3 things.